also the past president of African Bank. Throughout his illustrious career, Dr. Sam Motsuenyane played a critical role in ensuring that he empowers black business. I think the challenge for us today is, what are we going to do as business? We do not have an option but to double our efforts and in ensuring that socio-economic transformation happens in our lifetime. I would like to invite on stage our moderator for the session, our diva, Ms. Nokuthula Ndlovu. I told you you've got powerful women in BBC, didn't I? Let's just clap hands for them. Powerful women in their own right. Nokuthula Ndlovu is chair of the BBC ITC committee. She's the chairperson of the Indian Indian Ocean Rims Business Forum for South Africa, 23 country member states in the Indian Ocean, and 10 dialogue partners, including your Russia, your China, your America, Germany, and others. Ms. Ndlovu, over to you. You'll introduce your panel. And I know the minister is outside. We welcome the minister to this session. We really appreciate him taking the time to be with us today. Thank you. Over to you, Noki.
Thank you very much, our highly esteemed TG, who's also very powerful. Thank you. I would like to introduce the session. Sure. All right, so I would like to first call how the session is going to move. We are going to have our Honorable Minister Ibrahim Patel of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, who is going to give a keynote address. And after that, we are going to have our highly esteemed panel, whom I would first like to, the minister is here. May we all stand and give him a big round of applause. Yeah, we like that. We are Africans. Honorable Minister, we welcome you, sir, and we are honored to have you to give a keynote address on the session. The topic of the session is the African Continental Free Trade Area and opportunities for economic growth, localization, and industrialization. May we please give a big round of applause for our minister to come and give us a keynote address. And joining him on stage so that we have our panelists, I would like to call Mr. Tafadzwa Chibunguza, Chief Operations Officer of CIFSA, to come on stage. I would like to call Ms. Zolega Lisa, Vice President of Corporate Affairs at South African Breweries, to come on stage. I would like to call Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, Group Senior Executive of Aspen Pharma, to come on stage. Please give them a big round of applause. I mean, these guys have stock, eh? Give them a round of applause. And I would also like to welcome Ms. Mamongai Mahlara, Executive Chairperson of Takealot Group. Over to you, our esteemed Minister. Thank you.
Well, first, thank you very much to the program director, and I'd like to start by greeting the leadership of the Black Business Council, led by your president, Elias Monache, and your general secretary or CEO, as it is called in the business community, Hanke Matabane. I'd also like to greet the delegates who are present here today from the business community, from professionals, from regulators and government. I see many familiar faces and I see many friends in the audience, and it's really great to be here. And thank you very much for this invitation to share a few remarks and also be part of the discussion that will be led by this very, very eminent panel of South Africans. As our MC said, I've been asked to make remarks on the AFCFTA. It's a clumsy acronym, but it's one that I urge we all learn to let it trip easily off our tongue, because it's going to increasingly shape our world. Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, and to speak on localization and the opportunities it presents. Now, I want to make two self-evident remarks, ones that I think everyone in the room will agree with. The first is that economies are driven by their success in boosting their productive sectors, their manufacturing, their mining, their agriculture, and their productive services. And that the value of manufacturing in an economy is more than only the sum of its industrial output measured in rand terms. An economy, when faced with an opportunity, needs to exploit and utilize the natural resources available. Minerals, the fruit of the land. But it's through manufacturing and some of the productive services, but I'm going to speak about manufacturing in the context of localization specifically, that wealth, jobs, and technological know-how is generated. Wealth that is created in the transformation of the raw materials of nature into the finished products that we eat, we ride in, we inject into our bodies when we're not feeling well, we use to flip between cities, we use to amplify our voices. I am doing it today. And we use to cover ourselves in proudly South African garments. So if that's what drives economies, what drives businesses, and most of you in the room are business people, some of you are professionals, and some of you in government and support organizations. What drives businesses is fundamentally demand. Demand for your goods and your services, and demand in turn requires access to markets. And aside from the demand, as an industrialist or as an entrepreneur, your ability to master the supply challenges of running a business, the technology, the capital, the labor, bringing all of that together. Now, I make those very self-evident remarks about what drives economies and what drives businesses, because the topic you've chosen, the AFCFTA and localization, fit very well together. And I want to point to that. Both the AFCFTA, that's a free trade agreement for the African continent, and localization are programs of government to drive access to markets, to unlock markets. our domestic market, and also the wider African market. Our economy as South Africa generates 7 trillion rand in goods and services every year. Household consumption makes up about 4.6 trillion rand of that. Government consumption expenditures another 1.4 trillion rand. And so between those two categories, you're accounting for just about all the demand in the economy. Obviously, there are other elements to it, such as exports and, importantly, of course, capital spending. But remember that figure, 7 trillion rand. The continent as a whole, if you look at Africa, generates 52 trillion rand in output. Between the opportunity in the domestic market and the opportunity in the African market, the wider African market, is where the South African business community should be aiming at, and where there are enormous opportunities for Black South Africans. Let me start first with a few remarks on localization, and then really turn more substantially to the AFCFTA. So on localization, what we've done over the last 5 years is laid a platform to shift the policies of government and the partnership between business and government towards a much more active and aggressive relocalization, reindustrialization of our economy. Somewhere in over a long period of time, we lost the focus on protecting and supporting the opportunities in the domestic economy. And we had, from the early 2000s, a flood of goods coming into our economy as China entered the world trading system. And what we saw was almost overnight the closure of factories. My own background is as a trade unionist. I remember that my day-to-day job was going to negotiate retrenchment, factory closures. The fight was, instead of retrenching 500 workers, can you reduce the number maybe to 400 or 300? It was a losing game. And in this last 5 years, we've shifted much of the public discourse to the point now where, broadly speaking, with a few very small exceptions, there is a growing and deep commitment to localization as a key means to move forward. We launched a number of master plans in different sectors of the economy: clothing and textiles, poultry and sugar, furniture and steel. These were sectors that were facing decline. But we also launched master plans in growing sectors like the auto manufacturing sector and call centers. We call them global business services. Some of them have been quite successful: autos, sugar, poultry, global business services, and clothing and textiles. Some require more attention, like steel and furniture. But I want to illustrate with a few concrete examples the kind of impact that this partnership has and what a master plan is, because there are other sectors, some where you come from, that may not have a master plan, where there may be a need. So let me take the auto sector. Essentially, the agreement we reached with the auto industry was, we as government will do some things, but we need you to do a number of other things. And so the first thing we agreed we would do as government is we'd provide a regulatory environment. We would maintain high external tariffs. We'll give companies that produce locally a certificate that allows them to bring in products that offset some of their tariff duties. And we will help with some of the recapitalization costs when a company goes for a major upgrade in the models that it does. In return, what we want from the industry is a couple of things: much deeper localization of their supply chain, bringing in more local component manufacturers; transformation, where they put money directly on the table, more than 2 billion rand they've now put on the table, that must support Black-owned businesses, as well as procurement commitments where they undertake to buy products from Black South Africans. We had a couple of other elements in it. I'm not going to go through all of it. Standing back after 5 years, what have we seen? We've seen, 2 weeks ago, I went to the Eastern Cape to go and launch an announcement by Volkswagen that they're going to put 4 billion rand in upgrading their plant in Kariga. And when they upgraded, they're going to, in future, all of the polos everywhere in the world will only be made in South Africa. So the Polo brand will in future be exclusively produced here in South Africa. And they're going to expand production by building a new SUV in Kariga. Now, that's not a flash in the pan. In the same 5-year period, we've had a 50 billion rand commitment by the auto industry. We launched the new C-Class Mercedes-Benz manufacturing in South Africa. It's produced in only 3 places in the world, as you may know, in Bremen in Germany, in Beijing in China, and in Buffalo City in South Africa. We also launched the new Isuzu D-Max Bakkie and the Toyota Cross. And we are about to announce, within 2 weeks, we're going to have a major ceremony in the Eastern Cape where a large automaker that doesn't produce in South Africa is going to sign an agreement to build a new auto factory in South Africa that will be making a car that we currently import but that we will now localize. Now let me connect that to the theme of the conference or the summit, which is how far have we come with black economic empowerment. So we use the engines of the auto industry to say to them, hang on, we want to see the black suppliers of components. We now have an agreement with them. It's worth 6 billion rand, 2.3 billion in cash, and the rest in procurement. And that has resulted in them now having, we've got about 50 black-owned businesses in the auto value chain. They produce car seats. They produce the Mercedes-Benz body panels. If you slap the bonnet or the side fender, that's made by a black South African. And we brought together many of these 50 companies in the Black Industrialist Conference. You could see, you could touch, you could feel the products that they make that goes into a modern vehicle. So that was 2 weeks ago I went to the Eastern Cape. Last week I was in KZN for 2 days. And I spent the 2 days with sugar growers. And we reached a master plan with the sugar growers 5 years ago. And so we evaluated it. And what we basically did was we said the problem was a flood of sugar coming into the South African market from countries like Brazil and other parts of the world. So we needed to reverse this. And we took a number of steps as government, some of it regulatory, but we sat down with big companies like Coca-Cola, like Tiger Brands, like Shoprite Checkers, and we said, you need to commit to localize. And many of them agreed to localize quite significantly, increasing their local sugar procurement very dramatically. We released the data to the media on Thursday, Minister Toko Didiza and myself. In this 5-year period, we've had the start of the period and the end of the period, a 38% drop in the volume and value of imported sugar coming into South Africa, and a 23% increase in the quantity of sugar that is bought from South African farmers. But let's link it to the empowerment thing. I was there, I went to a mass rally in Gingindlovu on Friday, and it was packed with black, small-scale sugar growers. And 2,000 more sugar growers had come into Now, I'm going to use those 2 examples to illustrate what a master plan can do. I see Stavros is on the stage, so let me use a pharmaceutical example. We don't have a master plan, but we have a partnership. The partnership is with a company, Aspen Pharmacare. It's a South African company with global operations, and it's with a company called BioVac. BioVac is a company that is based in Cape Town. It's got very significant government equity in it. We are a shareholder in it as government, but there are also other shareholders, and it is run by a black industrialist, Morena Makwana. And what we did was we're working with Aspen initially to upgrade their facility in Gqeberha. They were well positioned during COVID to become a manufacturer of COVID vaccines. I looked at the export data, the official export data. We were exporting billions of rands of COVID vaccines that had been manufactured here in South Africa using the opportunity here. Not only localizing in our own market, but also exporting to the rest of the world. But in addition to the COVID vaccines, we opened up a new line in Aspen that they're now producing anesthetics that you use when you're in hospital for an operation. Propofol, the one that Michael Jackson famously took, is now produced in South Africa, not for the purposes that he took it. It's for when you are in a hospital and you really need it. We secured the right for the first time to produce human insulin to treat diabetes. We've landed the right now to produce oral vaccines for cholera and the right to produce vaccines for pneumococcal meningitis. 5 years ago, these were all products that would only be able to be imported, not just in South Africa, but the whole African continent. Now, because our time is limited, I'm not going to be able to go to all the examples. So let me stop with those examples and conclude. And the conclusion I make is that government plays a key role through procurement. We hit a setback with the decision by the Constitutional Court that the regulations issued under the PPPFA were not lawful. And so we've now rewritten the legislation. We have a procurement bill before Parliament. It's going through the NCOP now. And we hope it will be finalized before the end of the administration. It completely lifts localization as a core objective of government procurement. And so that is embedded in that bill for the first time. Previously, we had to conclude from the language of the bill that it could also cover possibly localization. Now we've made it an explicit goal. And so we see then, while some political parties, the opposition, would give a lot of speeches about climate change, what we did was we worked with local companies. We now have a black industrialist that produced the photovoltaic panels that are used in the solar plants. We have black South Africans running the generation of solar plants here in South Africa. You'll know some of them. We gave them a major award at the Black Industrialist Conference. I'm talking, among others, about Pele Green. And so let me call it for what it is, the Democratic Alliance has often equated excellence with corruption, black excellence with corruption. In this strange way, they've mixed these things up. As government, we've had no shyness about economic inclusion being a critical part of what we do. And DTIC policies now support more than 1,700 black-owned firms and black industrialists. From small businesses to industrial champions, they produce food and furniture and clothing and steel. You can hardly find an area of the economy where black South Africans are now not coming in manufacturing. Our job's not done. As Madima famously said, when you get to the top of that first hill, sweating, puffing, having put all of your energy in, you realize you've just got a moment to catch your breath because there are other peaks, other hills to climb. And so I want to come then to the question of the African and the global context, because I was asked to speak on that. South Africa is a major trading economy. We export a lot of our products. It's a big part of generating jobs in South Africa. And in 2022, we crossed the 2 trillion rand export mark for the first time in our history, where we're now exporting 2 trillion rand. And all of that essentially goes up to make that 7 trillion rand that I spoke of in our GDP. Africa has got enormous opportunities, but also big challenges. 17% of the world's population is African, 17%. And yet Africa only generates 3% of global wealth. And if you take a metric of industrialization like steel production, or you take car production, we produce about 1% of global output. So yes, it's a legacy of colonialism and the post-colonial landscape, but it also shows you the opportunity. We could be growing much faster because there's this enormous gap between our population size and our GDP output. And in a world where there's a slowing population, demographics are changing across the world, Africa is an outlier. By 2050, UN projections show that sub-Saharan Africa is expected to double our population. And we're going to be overtaking both China and India in total population fairly shortly. That's a market. That's a market of skills. That's a consumer market. And Africa is urbanizing fast. And when you urbanize and you create a middle class and formal employment, you create huge new demand that were previously met in subsistence farming. It now gets into where we can have enormous opportunities to build our economy. By 2040 alone, the urban population of Africa will be larger than the whole of China. Think about it. That's the size of the population that we're looking at. And so we need to see how we can position ourselves. I want to give you just one further set of data. Africa currently, we import much of what we need. You know, the saying that Africa sells what it don't consume and it consumes what it doesn't produce is so true. So we buy about 660 billion US dollars worth of goods from other parts of the world. Only 67 billion of that comes from other African countries. So I can give you, it's about 600 billion, $593 billion. Let me give you a rand value. 11 trillion rands worth of goods. Africa, I'm not talking of millions, I'm not talking of billions, I'm talking of trillions. 11 trillion rands worth of goods Africa buys from other continents. If you had to just localize 2%, 2.5% of that, just 2.5%, that is worth about 300 billion rand in the economic stimulus for the continent. Now, I make this point to let business people who are present here today see how big the opportunity is on the continent. And unlike many other markets, you're not a latecomer. This market is new. It's opening up now. And if black South Africans position themselves well, and as South African-based companies position themselves well, they're there early as this market open up. Now, there are many other advantages to trade with the rest of Africa. It's a smart de-risking strategy in a volatile and divided world. But it's also, when the rest of Africa grows, the economic multiplier for South Africa is bigger than when Europe grows or when China grows. Think about it. Very often the narrative is, are we growing faster than Nigeria? The truth is, even though we are currently the biggest economy on the African continent, right here as I stand now, it's not in our interest that Nigeria's growth slows down. When Nigeria or Ghana or Mozambique or Botswana grows fast, they pull in South African goods. So we benefit when we have a strong growth in the rest of the continent. In this past 5 years, we've done a lot to unlock the opportunities of the African Continental Free Trade Area. In 2019, we sat with an idea. Heads of state said, we agreed to this. In this 5 years, first, South Africa chaired the African Trade Ministers meetings for about 3 of the 5 years. We set up a functioning AFCFTA secretariat headed by a South African, Wamkele Mene, who now heads the African project on integration. We've now got 47 African countries that have signed and ratified the treaty. We now have 92% of the products in the tariff book, that's thousands and thousands of products, that we have a rule of origin that says how much African content it must have before it gets benefits. And we did many other things. Let me sum it up. On the 31st of January this year, President Ramaphosa went to the port of Durban, officially cut a ribbon took a piece of wood and hit the Ngungu drum and officially signaled the start of trade with the rest of the continent under the African Continental Free Trade Area, one where we give preferences to each other. We reduce our tariffs on other African products, they reduce their tariffs on South African products. And so we've got now not only the beginning of this trade on preferences, but we also have an agreement which we're now tidying up and putting the finishing touches to have a common area for services like retail, like finance and so on. We have a common framework to protect investment. We have a protocol on digital trade, which Takealot would want to take note of because it will give African platforms an edge over platforms that are based in other parts of the world. And we've got a protocol on promoting women and youth in trade and on competition. Now, let me tell you about the impact that our work on the rest of the continent has had. In 2019, the first year of this administration, or just before the first year of this administration, we were exporting, I'm going to round it slightly, 350 billion rands worth of goods to other African countries. In this past year, we're now exporting 550 billion rands worth of goods to other African countries. That's a 60% increase. It's an extraordinary increase over a 5-year period. It's a pivot by South Africa to other African countries. And we now, while we're doing that, we're not neglecting other markets. We're keeping our free trade agreement with Europe and with the United Kingdom. The UK we put in place 3 years ago after Brexit. And we did a lot of work with the United States. A bill has now been tabled in Congress that is intended to extend AGOA for even more than 10 years that we had been asking for. Let me now conclude with the final part of my remarks, which is how can local businesses and black-owned businesses benefit? So the first thing is on the African continent is to see that there are real opportunities in particular sectors. A small player that has got a very small business in South Africa on their own trying to break in the Nigerian market is not going to survive. You need to move together and get critical mass to be able to enter a large market like that. If it's a small neighboring market, you can manage. So we've got to think about how we take a sector, coordinate a big push into another African market. And we're not trying to hurt Nigerian business or Ghanaian business or Kenyan business. It's about replacing products that are coming from other parts of the world and having opportunity there. So the first one is a sector approach. So if the BBC was able to work with individual sectors, it would be great. The second one is to learn from each other. We've got a large number of black South Africans that are already successfully exporting to other African countries. We assisted 205 black exporters in this 5-year period in different ways to try to get into other markets. Many of them succeeded. Some of them want to get into those markets. They're not there yet. But we issued Black Exporter Awards this year. In fact, just a few weeks ago, both Elias and Hanki were present at the Black Industrialist Conference. One went to a company, Dynamic Fluid Control. They are led by Freddie Mugeri, Tumi Sehlo, and Mlungisi Kele. They do industrial valves. They export that industrial valves to 129 countries. The other winner was a company called Baines Transformers. They manufacture these transformers and they export it to other African countries. So there are black exporters with real experience. So we've created a black exporter network that brings together, if you're in exports and you're a black South African, you can join that network and they can share experience. If I'm in making widgets for a car and you're into food, I can let you use my contacts and my networks in Ghana because you're not going to be displacing me. But I can, even if I'm in the same sector, see how critical mass can get us into those markets. We're working on joint ventures. Some of it is between countries and some of it is between firms. Let me give you the example. When you see a car, because I used cars before, we now buy the rubber that goes into the tire of cars here on our roads from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Malawi, and from Cote d'Ivoire. We buy the copper that goes into the wiring system from Zambia. We buy the wiring harness where, this plastic is over the wire and it goes from your ignition to your battery to your tail lights. All of that is put in a harness in the car. That we buy from Botswana. The steering wheel system we buy from Tunisia. The car seat itself, including those leather seats, we buy from Lesotho. So we're creating a regional value chain, brings Africans together to work on pulling off a big project like car manufacturing. And then finally, we've got the Black Industrialist Program. I mentioned to Hanki that there's a lot we can share on that program, and maybe there'll be another opportunity to do it. But it's a combination of financial support, but even more important than financial support, it's what the regulators and partners can do to unblock opportunities for Black South Africans. Just in the conference that we had a few weeks ago, we got a major commitment from all the large companies, or many of the large companies in the economy, over the next a few years, to be buying a significant additional proportion of their goods from Black South Africans. I hope the President will be able to announce that tonight at the dinner, but those of you who were at that conference, of course, it's not going to come as a surprise. I know I've taken a lot of time, but I wanted to sketch out both localization and the opportunities on the African continent, and how Black businesses, and in partnership with other businesses in South Africa that are not Black-owned, how that collaboration can open up opportunities for localization and for more Black South Africans to come into the productive sectors of the economy. Joint ventures, partnerships, joint working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. All I heard was 7 trillion, 7 billion, because I just think numbers, 660 billion. I always imagine that because I've been into sessions where you are there, even when you are sleeping, you see numbers, right? Those are the kind of dreams you have. So I would like, because there's an audience, our members have been waiting for this session, I'm going to ask our panelists to give a 2-minute response because the minister has to go at 3 o'clock. 2 minutes each, then we're going to give our members and the audience to ask a few questions. And I know that some of the questions and statements that were made by our members, they want to understand from the panelists things like what is your company and industry contribution towards economic growth, localization, and industrialization, and with what the minister has shared as well. How do we get onboarded? You spoke about a digital platform for the Africa Free Trade. Don't know if that is still in progress or if it's going to happen. I heard you giving a nudge to Take a Lot, and also we are in a season or climate change, and the fifth industrial revolution is a reality for localization and manufacturing, and so I would just like us to respond. We'll start with Ms. Zolega from the South African breweries. I know that recently they had a program for us at the Black Business Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you to the Minister for his remarks, and greetings to the esteemed colleagues here this afternoon. Just some reflections, I think, from what I've heard. If you look at the beer business and the beer industry, localization, industrialization is core to who we are and how we operate. For us, we cannot be designed in Silicon Valley, manufactured in China, and then shipped all the way across somewhere and land of the continent. It's not our business model. Beer by its nature is local, it's natural, very closely tied to the agri-industry, and it's inclusive. We work with a range of businesses, SMMEs to black industrialists in our operations. And then I'd like to double down on this topic of localization and the role it plays in the AFCFTA. We've really seen the opportunity of getting local economies going and thriving to tackle head-on the challenge of unemployment. So one of the ways we've done that, we've really started within our own value chain. So if you think of some of our products, we are a highly, highly locally sourced business. 95% of all the ingredients that go into SAB beers come right here from South Africa, which means we drive job creation, economic upliftment, etc. I'll give you a very tangible example, minding time. We had an import substitution opportunity. For many years, South Africa would import limes. One would not think about it. We would import limes for one of our big products, Corona. We partnered 5 years ago with a community in Hoedspruit, in Muletele. We then worked with technical experts, Komati Group, who are citrus experts. We brought in funding. Today, that community is currently the largest exporter and manufacturer of grower of limes in the country. Secondly, we went into our value chain. Our glass value chain was highly untransformed. We went in many years ago, 5 years ago, similar timeline. We partnered with black industrialists today who are Isanti Glass. They today are ensuring that when you look at the glass bottles that our products come in are made by black industrialists. They are the only black-owned glass manufacturer, and currently, given the dynamics in the industry, the only South African-owned glass manufacturing business. So when we look at our value chain and we look at localization, we really are trying our level best to ensure that we are going to now take these businesses and look into opportunities to take our products, our raw materials, into neighboring countries by leveraging the opportunity that the AFCFTA offers.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Zoleka. I hope you are having your questions ready for the panel and the minister while he's still here. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Dr. Stavros.
Thank you, Program Director. And I think in the interest of time, let me respect all protocols and to say it's a pleasure to be here with such a distinguished audience. Last year when I spoke here, I made 2 points. I think the first was it's pleasing to see so many black women business people here. So let's again just say Malibongwe.
Halala. You're late, Mama. Aye.
And then secondly, I mentioned last year, which the minister has reinforced, that we have become a force to be reckoned with in the production of general anesthetics. Now, some of you misheard me and thought I said aesthetics, but I wanted to give an assurance that it's anesthetics that we are producing in this country. Now, the context that I wanted to provide today is the link between industrialization and the African continental free trade area. How are we seeing this in the pharmaceutical sector? My starting point is that Africa is a serial importer of pharmaceutical and other medical countermeasures, which is completely counterintuitive because we have the worst disease burden of any continent in the world. So the opportunity we are seeing is the free trade area presents 2 interesting levers, if I can call it that. Lever number 1 is the opportunity to aggregate volumes on the continent, and volumes equate to economies of scale, which means you can become competitive at a manufacturing level, and that's what the continent is lacking, amongst other things, is competitiveness. So the aggregation of volumes, for me, is the single biggest opportunity to industrialize on the continent. And then my final point is, of course, the free trade area also presents tariff reduction and in some case zero rating of tariffs. That will provide the continent, provided you are doing intracontinental trade, it will provide African manufacturers some type of competitive advantage against all the other countries we compete against. So let's embrace the FTA, let's own it, And I think let's take advantage of, at very least, the two perspectives I have given. Thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Stavros. Over to you, the chairperson of Take a Lot, Ms. Mamagai. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Minister, for your remarks. You know, Take a Lot Group, when you drive on the highway to come here, you see this massive warehouse with a big logo, and many of you might think this is a business that's existed for forever. The truth is, we are a medium-sized business, a teenager business, 14 years old. So when you talk about localization, when you talk about SME development, that's what we are. That's who we represent. And more specifically, 14-year-old business, we have over 10,000 restaurants that are listed on our Mr. D platform. We have over 20,000 small, medium businesses listed on the takealot.com. We have over 114 local designers that are selling on superbalist.com. Now, we, as a consequence, therefore, understand the multiplier effect of enabling small businesses to become medium businesses and medium businesses to become large businesses. We have seen over 33,000 jobs that are supported by this ecosystem. It's a 14-year-old business today supporting 33,000 jobs. Now, what that demonstrates is, with the right kind of support and enabling environment, is the level of success that can be achieved by a South African business. And more importantly, those small, medium businesses selling on the platform, all of them are local businesses. Increasingly, more and more of them are manufacturing their products locally, whether it's hair products or beauty products. And in return, their success becomes our success, and our success becomes their success. So at Take a Lot Group, we don't have a program for small businesses or black businesses. That is who we are. This is what we do every day. And our success only happens when those businesses are successful, right? And so because of that integral nature, we know the power of these digital platforms. And I think it was quite interesting to hear the minister talk about the influx of products that destroyed the textile industry in the early 2000s, because it's happening again in a more sophisticated format now with digital platforms that many of you get fed on every time you're on YouTube or online, where you're buying products at like really cheap prices. And we need to be mindful about how do we protect the small businesses here and improve localization by also balancing it with making sure that there's a level playing field with those international firms that have a disproportionate advantage in terms of being able to access our market. So I think also my call to you as consumers is that you are deciding where the jobs go. If you want to see this country thrive, you need to also support local businesses.
Sure.
Because they're sitting next to you. So think about the power of your vote with your rands, because you do it every single day. So let's work together and make sure that our money goes towards what we want to see in this country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You've put a challenge to us. Every time we open our apps, we need to know where we need to direct our spend. It's a very important point. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Tafadzwa, who's the CEO of CIFSA, to give an opening remark, and then after he has given, I'm going to open the questions. I hope the mics are roving around. Thank you.
Program Director, thank you for the opportunity, and Minister, thank you for your remarks. And I guess also in the interest of time, I'll collectively observe protocol. I think for us, Minister, on the 31st of January when that gong was raised and the
We were
ship
there.
left. I beg your pardon?
I'm saying we were there. The BBC.
You were,
was there.
yeah, the BBC, absolutely. Yeah. And it really came from, it really changed from the concept going from theory to practice, because even on that ship was contained products from grinding media and white goods from companies that are also represented from the steel and engineering sector. So that really showed that we've gone from theory and concept to execution. And I think that's a moment that's worth an ululating, because in essence, we are we are on the verge of a new frontier, a development frontier, because trade in time immemorial has always shaped patterns of development. I think what's important to highlight from a capital-intensive and technical industry is that the African Free Trade Agreement is not only an opportunity, but it's a means to survival. And Minister, you mentioned the point that steel needs a bit more attention, and I think this is really an outlet for demand that can really assist in lifting demand. So that's critical for us. And just to give a sense of the opportunity that is on the continent, we look at East Africa, and that's an area we've been looking at quite a bit in the beginning of the year. And you see that 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, consuming in excess of about 5 million tons of steel. That has grown over the last decade at about 11% year on year. And that 5 million tons, to give context, is the same amount of steel consumed here in South Africa, or just thereabout. But the point really is that in that East African region, there's zero steel production capacity. So when we talk opportunities, that is in itself a major opportunity for a dominant steel producing country like South Africa to supply into those markets. And it's, as I've mentioned, it's an important outlet. What I do want to maybe end off with, and this time was very tight, Program Director, but Minister, when you were pointing out where the opportunities are, I think another important area that we should look at is the potential of using the financial services sector as a means to drive an SA Inc. approach. And by that, that also then touches to, you mentioned, if an SMME who wants to tap into Nigeria, or East Africa in the example I'd used, often would not immediately have the opportunity. But you have many financial institutions in the country financing projects there. And I think that's a real lever to aggregate local production where they approach a potential project that they're funding, and also highlighting the fact that we have ABC suppliers from South Africa. I think from a low-hanging fruit, Minister, given the deep capital pools that we have in the country and the highly sophisticated capability to structure financial instruments and already are funding on the African continent, there's a real opportunities there to carry the large players, but also the SMMEs who can play on the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to start with the questions. We're going to have 4 questions. I see a hand there. That's the first question. I see another hand here on this row. I see another hand here, so I have to look that side. There's another hand, and there's another hand. Can we start with those? Because the minister has to go, then we'll do the second round if our TG still permits. Okay, let's start. 1 question so that we give everyone a chance. And do say who your name is and straight to the question and who is the question for. Thank you.
Okay, Adolfina Mani from the Patriotic Alliance. I just want to ask a question about local. When you mean local, you mean South Africans. I just wanted to be clear about that, because I hear local, but I'm not sure whether you are referring to the whole Africa or to South Africa, because this is South Africa. Because
Okay.
I would prefer that when you say local, you mean you are promoting the South African businesses. And then I would prefer that when you say local, at least you should start with at least controlling the borders, so that people, for example, like people who are
Madam,
working,
I'm just asking you if you can just ask a question. Is your
Yes.
question a definition of what is local?
yes, local.
Thank you. Noted. Who's this question for? Is it for the
For
minister?
the minister, yes.
Definition of local. Thank you. The next question. There was a lady here. Can the mic move to her? Thank you. I would just like the media team to move with speed. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister, as well as Program Director. My name is Advocate Dironso Mohale. I am from Baagiri Professional Practice. Allow me to read my question so I can keep it concise and quick. The question is for the Minister. You spoke about access, although access to different resources. You spoke about localization. The AFC, the free trade area, aims to promote free trade within the African continent and for the African continent. The trade area is founded on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which was brokered by the African Union, which also happens to be the owner and custodian of the Malabo Convention, which speaks to data protection. Do you guys in the hallways speak about data protection, localization, sovereignty, because a lot of countries, although supposed to be modeling their law against the Malabo Convention, have included data localization because personal data is regarded as a state asset.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Third question here. Then we have two there. After his question, we'll go there, and then we'll go, yes, and we'll stop and allow the panel and the minister to respond. Please, let's keep it concise so the minister can still respond. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Minister. Charles Swetsang from Swetsang Consulting. The Durban port, specifically the Durban port, is congested, and we have backlogs that are really hampering the economy. As we speak right now, Mozambique is building a harbor of its own. My clients in the manufacturing industry are willing to pay a premium in US dollars to run away from the Durban port. What are we going to do about that? Is it that swear word again, privatization?
Thank you.
My question is directed to the minister. I just want to find out, Minister, how government and competition regimes across Africa are aligning in terms of protecting the small businesses, especially with regard to protecting them in creating favorable conditions for them to trade, because they are usually bullied by the big companies. Do you have specific developmental programs, specifically for small programs, with other countries across the borders to create a favorable condition for small businesses?
Thank you. Thank you. One more question? Yes, sir. And then we'll stop the questions. And then we'll allow the panel to respond.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Nyameko Magongo from Absolute Construction Project Managers. I stand here as a black South African. My heart weeps in the sense that these are grand schemes. These are grand numbers. But as black people, we are going to continue being spectators. Why do I say that? Minister speaks of localization. At an earlier session on the skills development sector, we're talking globalization. And when you look at the counterparts, other countries, Germany, even in the continent, you go to the east, you go to Rwanda, there's a fundamental investment in artisanal, technical skills, because those are the things that allow you to produce and sustain yourself. In this country, we're focusing on creating, and there's nothing wrong with it, there's space for it. We are focusing on creating managerial, so-called soft skills, specialists, yet the real value of the economy is in our people being able to anchor their artisanal skills, their technical skills, because these things produce. The issue of focusing on creating apps, whatever the case may be, in the technical space, you've got to be artisanal, you've got to be technical for businesses to grow and sustain themselves. So I really plead with the minister if he can please engage with his colleagues in the skills sector.
Thank you. We also have the BBC Skills Portfolio Committee and the ITC Skills we really do require people to also come and join us, and there is structures for us to tap in with the different ministers and master plans that the minister was referring to. So when you join the BBC, you will have access to participate in those structures and you become a member. I'm not defending the minister, I'm just bringing out our value offer as the Black Business Council. Thank you. Over to you, sir. Let's, one more question, then we can respond.
Sanbonani,
Yebo.
Ninjani Kamala Mobusisiwe, Nkwanyana from Dobsonville. I'm doing agriculture. I've got my partners here. I'm a lady with a Lilizela.
Ah, halala.
Okay, I have to acknowledge myself because this is a talent. So I have to embrace my talent.
Yes.
And if anyone needs me for
Well-
that, then I'm available.
But for now, we just want the question for the minister so
Okay.
that it doesn't go.
Okay.
Thank you.
The
We acknowledge.
The minister will have to wait because I did Lilizela for him. Thank you. Okay. Okay, I've heard the minister said you are speaking of the Tiger brand and the black economy empowerment. So mine, I'm asking if Tina, as farmers, we are processing, but we have a problem because the processing part has requirements that we can't we don't have the conducive places, ne? So yeah, na inkinga yethu ukuthi we can't grow in our processing department at the lower level. So we need our minister to upgrade us in a way yokuthi at least bas accommodate. There are places, especially here in Joburg, there are
Yes.
places as value ukuthi those places maybe can be converted ukuthi siyenze agro processing in many ways so that we can grow. The most and the part eyokuthi thina singakwazi ukukhula is the place where we process our produce. So we okunye bengizocela kuye ukuthi i-Tiger brand yona is empower kanjani thina ama farmers. And
Okay.
also any question yalapha ku SAB. Lapha ku SAB siyazi ukuthi SAB abo Heineken and whatsoever zenziwa ngombila, and we are farmers. We need to tap in there and grow our businesses because now we are always batting
Okay.
SMMEs, but we
Yes.
don't grow kuba
Thank-
ama commercial farmers. Ngiyabonga.
Ngiyabonga
Thank you.
kakhulu. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll allow the minister to respond, and over to SAB. Thank you.
So first, thank you very much, Noki. I know I could see many other hands up, and I wish there was a bit more time, but it shows a real interest in the topic. Let me start with the question that was asked from the delegate from the Patriotic Alliance. I didn't catch your name, but I heard the question. So when we talk of local, we're talking of products that are made by South African hands here in South Africa. But I want to make a very important qualification. If we look around the world and we see what are the economies that are growing fast and the economies that are providing a lot of opportunity